They were the most feared tag team in the history of professional wrestling. Two men painted like something out of a nightmare, built like they had been carved out of concrete, marching to the ring in spiked leather while thousands of people lost their minds. For the better part of a decade, nobody could touch them. Not the Four Horsemen, not the Midnight Express, not Demolition, not anyone. They walked into every major territory in America, bent the knee. They held gold in the AWA, they held gold in the World Wrestling Federation. No team before them had ever done that, and no team has done it since. And then somehow it all slipped away. The most dominant tag team the business had ever produced went from headlining arenas to being booked to lose to comedy acts. From terrifying grown men in the locker room to being handed a ventriloquist dummy as a mascot. From an aura that money could not buy to a storyline about a man's real addiction that both members eventually begged the company to stop airing. By the time the story was finished, both of them were gone. One at 46, one at 60. And an entire generation of wrestling fans grew up barely knowing their names. This is the story of the Road Warriors, and this is how the single most unstoppable force in the history of tag team wrestling slowly became one of the most quietly forgotten legends the business has ever produced. In this video, we are going to trace the whole thing from the beginning, how two bouncers from Minnesota stumbled into wrestling almost by accident, how they invented a look and a style that would be copied for the next 40 years, how they conquered the AWA, then the NWA, then Japan, then finally the World Wrestling Federation, achieving something no tag team had ever accomplished, and then how the ground shifted underneath them, how the business they helped build moved on without them, how injuries, addiction, bad booking, and a changing industry chipped away at the aura until there was almost nothing left. And how, when both men died far too young, the wrestling world realized it had never quite given them their due while they were still here. But to understand how far they fell, you first have to understand just how high they climbed. And it all started with a phone call that should never have happened. The year was 1983, and in Minneapolis, Minnesota, there was a gym and a nightclub that would end up changing wrestling history without anyone realizing it at the time. Michael Hegstrand and Joseph Laurinaitis were not wrestlers yet, they were bouncers. Enormous, intimidating young men who worked the door at a club called Grandma B's, throwing out troublemakers and keeping the peace with their sheer size. They were bodybuilders, gym rats, guys who lived in the weight room and looked like it, and they were friends, real friends, the kind of bond that would define both of their lives. And they both fell into the orbit of a man named Eddie Sharkey. Now, Eddie Sharkey does not get nearly enough credit for what he did for the wrestling business. Out of a modest training setup in Minnesota, Sharkey trained an absolutely staggering number of future stars. Rick Rude came through there, Barry Darsow, who would later become Crusher, Khrushchev, and then one half of Demolition, came through there. Nikita Koloff, John Nord, and others all learned the basics from the same man. And into that same class walked Hegstrand and Laurinaitis, two guys who looked like $1 million but had almost no idea what they were doing between the ropes. Laurinaitis got moving first, breaking in as a singles wrestler under the name The Road Warrior, borrowed straight from the Mad Max film that was tearing up theaters at the time. But the thing that would make history had not happened yet. The thing that would make history was an accident. Down in Georgia Championship Wrestling, the booker was a legendary hard case named Ole Anderson. Anderson had a card to fill, and he had Laurinaitis, but Laurinaitis needed a partner for the night. The man who was supposed to fill that slot ran into legal trouble and could not appear, so Anderson needed a replacement, and he needed one fast. He picked up the phone and called Hegstrand. That was it. That was the moment. A last-minute phone call to cover for a guy who got himself in trouble. Neither man had any idea that the pairing thrown together that night would become the most influential tag team the industry would ever see. Anderson gave them their names. Laurinaitis had already debuted as Animal. For Hegstrand, the story goes that Anderson said something about flying around like a hawk, and the name simply stuck. Animal and Hawk, the Road Warriors, and they needed one more piece. They needed a manager, and Anderson had a young guy on his roster named Paul Ellering, who was not doing much of anything, working the opening matches, going nowhere. And Ellering was a former junior powerlifting champion, a man who had reportedly deadlifted around 745 pounds with a genuinely brilliant mind and a gift for talking. Knee injuries had ground down his in-ring dreams, and he wanted a path that did not depend on his own broken body. Anderson told him to become the manager of the Road Warriors, or else. Ellering took the job, and Precious Paul Ellering became the brain that guided the two most destructive bodies in the business. Now here's the problem those three men faced at the very start. Hawk and Animal looked incredible, absolutely incredible, but they could barely wrestle. They were green. They did not have the years of technical grounding that most main event talent spent a decade developing. A lesser booker might have seen that as a fatal flaw. Ole Anderson saw it as an opportunity. Instead of exposing their inexperience in long, complicated matches, Anderson booked them in squashes, short, violent, one-sided destructions, where the Road Warriors simply annihilated whatever poor soul was standing across the ring. They did not need 45 minutes of chain wrestling. They needed 90 seconds of carnage, clothesline, press slam, something enormous and loud and final, and the crowd ate it up. And then somebody added the detail that turned two big guys into gods. The face paint, the spiked shoulder pads, the look ripped straight out of a post-apocalyptic wasteland. It has often been said that Mid-South promoter Bill Watts suggested adding the paint, and once it went on, everything clicked. Suddenly they were not just two muscular bouncers, they were monsters. They were something out of a movie that had escaped the screen and walked into the arena. And crucially, they were the first team to take a theme from a film and bring it fully to life in a wrestling ring. Nobody had ever done that before. They were the originators. Understand what a leap that was. In the early 1980s, most wrestlers looked like your uncle in trunks. The Road Warriors looked like they had come to burn the building down. Their entrance became an event. Their music hit, the paint gleamed under the lights, and the pop that greeted them became so consistent and so enormous that it got its own name in the business. The Road Warrior Pop. That was the term wrestlers used to describe the wall of noise that only a truly connected act could summon. And Hawk and Animal summoned it every single night. There was a magic there that no promoter could manufacture on purpose. They were supposed to be villains at first. Anderson brought them in as heels, as bad guys the fans were meant to despise. It did not work. The fans refused to boo them. They were too cool, too impressive, too much fun to watch. And so the wrestling world learned an early lesson that it would relearn again and again over the years. You could not tell the crowd how to feel about the Road Warriors. The crowd decided on its own, and the crowd decided it loved them. And here's the thing about that aura. It was not entirely an act. Hawk and Animal were legitimately imposing human beings, genuinely strong, genuinely intimidating, the kind of men other wrestlers did not want to cross in real life. In a business where the tough guy reputation is often smoke and mirrors, theirs was mostly real. They looked like they could hurt you because they could, and that authenticity bled through the television screen and into the seats. Fans were not just watching two performers, they were watching two forces of nature that happened to have agreed to wrestle. You cannot fake that, you cannot teach it. And it is the single hardest thing in the entire business to manufacture. The Road Warriors had it in abundance from the very first night. That combination of raw look, short brutal matches, undeniable charisma, and genuine menace made them the hottest tag team property on the planet almost overnight. And once the fire caught, the Road Warriors did what their name promised. They hit the road and they conquered everything in their path. And they started stacking up championships in Georgia, capturing the NWA national tag team titles and establishing themselves as the team to beat. But two young stars burning that brightly could not be contained in one territory. In the summer of 1984, they took their act to the American Wrestling Association WarGames promotion, a proud old company that was one of the biggest in the country. On August the 25th, 1984, barely more than a year into their existence as a team, Hawk and Animal defeated the beloved veteran team of the Crusher and Baron von Raschke to win the AWA World Tag Team Championship. Think about that timeline, a year. Most teams spend a decade paying dues before they touch a world title. The Road Warriors did it in 12 months because there was simply no way to keep them down. And once again, Gagne had brought them in, expecting them to be heels, monstrous invaders for the fans to rally against. And once again, the fans flatly refused to play along. The squash matches, the destruction, the sheer spectacle of it all won the AWA crowds over completely. They became the top draw in the territory throughout 1984 and 1985. feuding most memorably with the fabulous Freebirds in a program that packed arenas across the region. And they held that AWA gold for over a year, an eternity of dominance, before finally dropping the belts in the autumn of 1985 amid a mess of Freebirds interference. But by then they had already outgrown the AWA too, because a bigger, more national stage was calling, and it was in that arena that the Road Warriors would put together the run that cemented their legend. The National Wrestling Alliance, and specifically Jim Crockett Promotions out of the Mid-Atlantic region, was on its way to becoming the primary rival to Vince McMahon's expanding empire. This was big-time wrestling, national television on TBS, sold-out buildings across the South and the Midwest. And the Road Warriors arrived right in the middle of the golden era of that company. The talent they shared a ring with reads like a Hall of Fame ballot. The Four Horsemen, Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, the Midnight Express with Jim Cornette, Dusty Rhodes, the Russians, the Rock and Roll Express. This was arguably the deepest, most talented roster the sport had ever assembled in one place. And the Road Warriors did not just survive in that environment, they stood at the very top of it. They gave the fans moments that people still talk about decades later. There was the infamous scaffold match at Starrcade in 1986, a terrifying spectacle where teams fought high above the ring on a narrow platform with no ropes and no safety net, the crowd holding its breath at the thought of a fall. The Road Warriors went to war against the Midnight Express up there in one of the most dangerous stipulations the business ever produced, a match so risky that manager Jim Cornette famously wrecked his knee taking a fall from the structure. There were long, heated wars with the Four Horsemen, the most cerebral villains in the sport, pitted against the most physical team alive, brains against brawn in front of packed houses. There were nights when Hawk and Animal still built like tanks, but now, with years of ring time behind them, looked completely and utterly unbeatable. For a stretch in the mid-1980s, the Road Warriors were arguably the biggest tag team draw in the entire United States. The act that promoters across the country wanted on top of the card because they moved tickets everywhere they went. And then there was the night they crossed a line that even they were not supposed to cross. For years, the Road Warriors had been the ultimate good guys almost against their own will. But in 1988, Jim Crockett Promotions decided to do the unthinkable and turn them into villains for real. And they did it with one of the most shocking angles of the decade. During a confrontation involving the beloved Dusty Rhodes, Animal used one of the metal spikes from his shoulder pad to gouge at Dusty's eye, and the storyline sold it as Dusty being blinded, his face a mask of blood. The American dream apparently maimed by the men the fans had adored. It was brutal, it was unforgettable, and it showed a different side of the team, a genuine mean streak that reminded everyone these were not cuddly baby faces, these were dangerous men who could turn on anybody. That same year, they finally captured the NWA World Tag Team Championship, adding the third major crown to their collection, and moving one enormous step closer to something no team had ever achieved. Because by now, the Road Warriors had held the top tag titles in the NWA and the AWA, two of the three biggest promotions in the country. There was only one mountain left to climb, only one company left to conquer. And it was the biggest one of all. While they conquered America, they were also becoming legends on the other side of the world. In Japan, the Road Warriors were treated as absolute superstars, larger-than-life monsters, imported to test the very best that Japanese wrestling had to offer. They toured for the major Japanese promotions, running through the toughest and most respected competitors that country produced, and the fans there embraced them with an intensity that never wavered. Their power style translated perfectly to a culture that valued strength, stoicism, and physical dominance above flash. A Japanese audience did not need the paint explained to them. They took one look at these two mountains of muscle and understood exactly what they were watching. The Road Warriors built a following in Japan that would last their entire careers, and in Hawk's case would give him a home to return to when things went sour in America. Japan loved them in a way that never faded, even when the American audience's attention started to drift elsewhere. Remember that because it matters later. The place that appreciated them most consistently, right to the end, was the place farthest from home. But the destination that would define their legacy and eventually their decline was Stamford, Connecticut, the World Wrestling Federation, Vince McMahon's machine. The company that had gone national, gone to pay-per-view, gone to Saturday morning cartoons and rock and wrestling and Hulkamania, the biggest wrestling company on earth. And here's where the story takes its first strange turn, because before the real Road Warriors ever arrived in the World Wrestling Federation, Vince McMahon had already built a counterfeit version of them. Their names were Axe and Smash. Together they were called Demolition. Two big men in face paint and leather and spikes marching to heavy metal, destroying opponents in short, dominant matches. If that sounds familiar, it is because it was a near total imitation of the Road Warriors, right down to one of its members being Barry Darsow, the very same man who had trained alongside Hawk and Animal back in Eddie Sharkey's class in Minnesota. Demolition became one of the most successful tag teams in World Wrestling Federation history, holding the World Tag Team Championship for a record-setting reign. So think about the situation the Road Warriors walked into. They had invented a look and a style so powerful that the biggest company in the world had already made a knockoff and turned that knockoff into champions. When Hawk and Animal finally debuted in the World Wrestling Federation in the summer of 1990, now billed simply as the Legion of Doom, they were in the bizarre position of being the originals, arriving in a house that a copy of them had already helped build. The fans knew, of course. The fans always knew. The Legion of Doom debuted to a huge reaction, and they were immediately positioned against Demolition in a battle of the real thing versus the imitation. On paper, it was a dream scenario. The originators had finally shown up to reclaim their own idea from the copy that had gotten rich off of it, and the crowd could feel the significance of it. It should have been the perfect feud, a story that wrote itself. But behind the scenes, one of the Demolition members was dealing with serious health problems. The lineup had to be shuffled. A third man was brought in, and the whole program never quite reached the white-hot intensity everyone had imagined. The moment came and went without the definitive, era-defining blow-off it deserved, and it was the first small sign of a pattern that would repeat again and again. The World Wrestling Federation, for all its enormous power and reach, never quite figured out how to present the Road Warriors at the towering level they had enjoyed in every other territory on Earth. Still, the goal was clear, and in the summer of 1991, they reached it. At SummerSlam 1991, the Legion of Doom defeated the Nasty Boys to win the World Tag Team Championship. And with that victory, Hawk and Animal made history that stands to this day. They became the only team ever to hold the World Tag Team Championship in the AWA, the NWA, and the World Wrestling Federation. The three biggest promotions of the entire wrestling boom. The unofficial Triple Crown of tag team wrestling. Nobody had done it before them. Nobody has done it since. That should have been the crowning moment of an unstoppable dynasty. In hindsight, it was closer to the peak of the mountain, the exact point where the only direction left to travel was down. Because here's the uncomfortable truth about the Road Warriors in the World Wrestling Federation. The most dominant tag team in wrestling history held the World Wrestling Federation World Tag Team Championship exactly one time, one reign. And it did not last especially long. This team that had held the AWA belts for over a year, that had reigned in the NWA, that had been the undisputed kings of every territory they entered, got a single run at the top of the biggest company in the world, and then the machine moved on. Worse than that, the World Wrestling Federation started to fumble the very thing that made them special. In 1992, in one of the most baffling creative decisions of the era, the company saddled the Legion of Doom with a ventriloquist dummy named Rocco, tying it into a backstory about Paul Ellering knowing the team since childhood. These were two of the most terrifying men in the history of the sport, and they were being asked to march to the ring with a puppet. The mystique that had taken a decade to build was being chipped away one embarrassing segment at a time. Hawk had enough. Frustrated with the direction, dealing with his own demons, he walked away from the World Wrestling Federation in 1992 and headed back to Japan, where he was still treated like the star he knew he was. The team, for the first time in nearly a decade, was simply not together. And then came the injury that took the choice out of everyone's hands. Animal suffered a serious back injury, a herniated disc so severe that it kept him out of the ring for years. In the prime of a career, in the middle of the industry's biggest boom, one half of the greatest tag team alive was flat on his back, rehabbing, wondering if he would ever wrestle again. The team that had never stopped moving suddenly stopped completely. And in wrestling, momentum is everything. When you disappear, the business does not wait for you, it replaces you. While Animal healed, the wrestling world was transforming into something Hawk and Animal barely recognized, and the version of the industry that emerged had far less room for what the Road Warriors did best. The mid-1990s gave way to the Monday Night War, the brutal ratings battle between McMahon's World Wrestling Federation and Ted Turner's WCW. And out of that war came a new style, a new attitude, a whole new kind of wrestling. The audience wanted edgier characters, faster matches, complex storylines, cruiserweights, flying around the ring, technical wizards, trading holds. The tag team division across the industry began to shift toward smaller, quicker, more athletic teams who could go 20 minutes of nonstop action. The Road Warriors were the opposite of all of that. Their entire appeal was built on the squash, on short, devastating destruction, on no selling, the practice of shrugging off an opponent's offense to look invincible. That approach had made them gods in 1985. By the late 1990s, a growing number of fans and insiders saw it as dated. Critics started to say out loud what had been unthinkable a decade earlier, that the Road Warriors did not actually have great matches, that they had gotten by on look and aura, that the business had passed them by. Whether or not that was fair, the perception took hold. And perception in wrestling becomes reality. Hawk spent those years in Japan teaming with a young powerhouse named Kensuke Sasaki in a duo called the Hell Raisers, keeping his own legend alive in the one country that never stopped believing in him. Animal slowly recovered, and eventually the two men found their way back together and back to the World Wrestling Federation, returning in 1997 for one more run. They even captured the World Wrestling Federation Tag Team Championship again that year, a reminder that the fans still roared for them the moment that music hit, but the world had changed, and the World Wrestling Federation's plan to modernize the most old school team in wrestling was about to produce one of the most cringe-inducing chapters in the entire history of the Road Warriors. In the spring of 1998, someone in the World Wrestling Federation looked at Hawk and Animal, two of the most iconic figures in the sport, and decided they needed a makeover. The result was LOD 2000. The idea was to drag the Road Warriors into the futuristic, edgy aesthetic of the Attitude Era. So they shaved off the signature mohawks that fans had known for 15 years. They ditched the classic post-apocalyptic gear for a shinier, more science fiction look, complete with new helmets, and they gave them a manager, one of the most popular women in the company at the time, Sunny. The plan was to freshen up the act and turn them back into the dominant top babyface team of the tag division. It bombed almost immediately. The new look stripped away exactly what had made them special. The whole point of the Road Warriors was that they looked like they had crawled out of a nightmare. Cleaning them up and modernizing them was like putting a suit on a wolf. The chemistry with Sunny never materialized, and as her own situation with the company deteriorated, she was quietly removed from the act. Hawk and Animal themselves reportedly were not fans of the whole direction, and the losses started to pile up. This team of legends was suddenly dropping matches to acts like the Godwins and the Disciples of Apocalypse. Vince McMahon, the man who decided who mattered, was visibly growing tired of them, and in the World Wrestling Federation, when Vince grows tired of you, the end is near. But the company was not done. Instead of quietly moving on, the World Wrestling Federation decided to build a storyline around the wreckage, and they made the single most tasteless decision in the entire history of the team. To add some drama to the flailing act, they brought in a new member, a young star named Darren Drozdov, known as Droz, or in some cases by the even less flattering name of Puke. The storyline had Animal beginning to see Hawk as a liability, someone unfit to compete, with Droz positioned to take his place, and here's the part that crossed the line. The reason the storyline gave for Hawk being unfit was addiction. Because Hawk, in real life, genuinely struggled with drug and alcohol problems for much of his career. It was not a secret. It was a painful, private battle that the man had fought for years. And the World Wrestling Federation decided to put that real suffering on television as an angle. They booked segments where Hawk appeared to be under the influence. They had his own partner turn on him, hitting him with the team's own finisher to drive him out. And then came the moment that people who watched it have never been able to shake. On an episode of Raw, the storyline reached its horrifying climax. Hawk, portrayed as broken and hopeless, climbed all the way to the top of the towering Titantron structure, high above the entrance stage, and he stood up there and threatened to jump to end his own life. On live television, Animal and Paul Ellering stood on the floor far below, begging him to come down. At one point, the script even had them use his real name, Mike, to hammer home how personal it was supposed to feel. Droz climbed up after him, appearing to plead with him, and then in the sickening final beat, Droz seemed to shove Hawk off the structure entirely. It was, by almost any measure, a low point, taking a man's genuine, life-threatening addiction and staging a fake suicide attempt around it for ratings. Both Hawk and Animal made it clear that they hated it. They objected. They wanted the real issue left off television because it was not entertainment. It was their friend's actual life. Eventually, mercifully, the angle was dropped, but the damage was done. The most feared team in wrestling history had been reduced to a punchline built on a man's pain. And not long after, in 1999, the Road Warriors left the World Wrestling Federation. That should tell you everything about how far the fall had gone. The team that once made the entire industry bend the knee had been booked into humiliation, then written out. And the final years for both men would be a scattered, wandering search for the glory that had once come so easily. After leaving the World Wrestling Federation, Animal drifted to WCW as that company entered its own death spiral, at one point aligning with a villainous group alongside Ric Flair and Scott Steiner in the final days of the promotion before it was bought out and shut down in 2001. It was a sad backdrop for a legend, a great company collapsing with one of the greatest performers of all time along for the ride to the end. Hawk, meanwhile, was fighting the fight that mattered far more than any match. He was battling to get clean, and by all accounts, in the last years of his life, he won that fight. Both men became born-again Christians in 2003, and they began appearing together at faith-based events, at independent shows, trying to reignite the partnership that had meant everything to them. They were older now, slower, but when they stood side by side in the paint, something of the old magic flickered back to life. There was even one last big moment. On the 12th of May, 2003, the Road Warriors made a surprise appearance on Raw, challenging Kane and Rob Van Dam for the World Tag Team Championship in front of a crowd that remembered exactly who they were. They came up short, but Hawk looked healthy. He looked happy. He looked like a man who had beaten the demons that had haunted him for 2 decades. After everything, it seemed like the story might get a peaceful ending, a quiet, hard-won redemption for 2 brothers who had conquered the world together. It was not to be. On the 19th of October, 2003, Michael Hegstrand, the man the world knew as Road Warrior Hawk, was at home in Florida. He and his wife had recently bought a new condo and were looking forward to the move, and that evening, Hawk told her he was feeling tired and wanted to turn in early. He said he was going to close his eyes for a while. He went to bed and he never woke up. His wife found him. Hours later, he was gone. A massive heart attack had taken him in his sleep. He was 46 years old. The autopsy told a story that broke the hearts of everyone who knew him. Even though Hawk had gotten clean, even though he had turned his life around, the years of hard living had already done their damage. His heart had been quietly failing for a long time. The lifestyle of the 1980s and 1990s, the grind of the road, the drugs and the drinking he had finally conquered, had weakened his body beyond repair. He got sober, he found peace, and it still was not enough to save him. That is the cruel arithmetic of the wrestling business in that era. A cost paid by far too many men from that generation. Animal was devastated. Hawk was not just his tag team partner. Hawk was his brother in every way that counted, the other half of a friendship that had started at a nightclub door in Minnesota and carried them across the entire world. Animal later recalled their final phone conversation the day before Hawk died. Hawk told him that he loved him and asked if Animal knew that. Animal said he did and told Hawk that he loved him too and said he would talk to him that night. there would be no more calls. With Hawk gone, the Road Warriors were finished. There could be no Road Warriors without both men, but Animal was not ready to let the legacy fade. He made a choice to keep fighting, to carry the torch for the team the two of them had built. In 2005, Animal returned to the WWE and formed a new version of the Legion of Doom with a large young wrestler named Heidenreich, who took on the paint and the persona in tribute to Hawk. Together, they won the WWE Tag Team Championship in a moment Animal dedicated to his fallen friend. It was a genuinely touching gesture, and it was also, quietly, the last time any member of the Road Warriors would ever hold a major North American championship. But everyone could feel the truth of it. It was not the same. It could never be the same. Heidenreich was a good man doing his best, but there was only one Hawk, and there would only ever be one. Animal left the WWE in 2006, and after that wrestled only sporadically. Then in 2011, the recognition finally came. The Road Warriors, along with their manager Paul Ellering, were inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, and in a beautiful full circle moment, they were inducted by Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream, the same man they had feuded with so memorably, the same man whose eye they had storyline blinded all those years earlier in the NWA. Animal stood on that stage and accepted the honor for both of them, for himself and for Hawk, who should have been standing right beside him. That same year, Animal released a memoir telling the full story of their careers, their brotherhood, the danger and the death and the rush of the whole wild ride. For the next several years, Animal was the living keeper of the flame. He made appearances, he told the stories, he reminded people who the Road Warriors had been. His son, James Laurinaitis, became an accomplished professional football player, and Animal got to be a proud father as well as a wrestling legend. And then, on the 22nd of September 2020, Joseph Laurinaitis, Road Warrior Animal, passed away at the age of 60. He died at a resort in Missouri, and the cause was reported as natural causes with a heart attack cited. And with his passing, both halves of the greatest tag team in wrestling history were gone. The two brothers who had painted their faces and conquered the world were reunited on the other side, as Hulk Hogan put it in his tribute, with plenty of unfinished business to take care of. The tributes poured in. Wrestlers and fans across the industry mourned. WWE and AEW both paid their respects. For a few days, the wrestling world remembered exactly how much the Road Warriors had meant. And then, as it always does, the news cycle moved on. Which brings us to the hard question at the heart of this whole story. If the Road Warriors were the most dominant tag team in the history of professional wrestling, and almost everyone who lived through their peak agrees that they were, then why does it so often feel like they have been quietly forgotten? Part of the answer is the way their story ended in the ring. When people remember a legend, they tend to remember how the story finished. And the last extended run the Road Warriors had on the biggest stage in wrestling was not the AWA dominance or the NWA wars. It was LOD 2000. It was the buzz cuts and the helmets and the losses to comedy teams. It was the Titantron angle. A whole generation of fans who came of age during the Attitude Era did not see the unstoppable monsters of 1985. They saw two aging legends being mishandled, repackaged, and written off. First impressions are powerful, and for millions of viewers, that sad final chapter was their first and only impression. Part of the answer is the numbers on paper. Modern wrestling history is written largely through the lens of the WWE, and in the WWE record books, the Road Warriors were one-time World Tag Team Champions, one reign. To a young fan scrolling through a list of accomplishments, that does not scream greatest of all time. It does not capture the year-plus AWA reign, the NWA gold, the years of God-tier status in Japan, the Triple Crown that no one else ever matched. All of that history happened in companies that no longer exist, in territories that have been swallowed up and paved over. The context that made them titans got erased, along with the promotions themselves. A part of the answer is the style. As the business evolved toward work rate and long, intricate matches, the squash and power approach that defined the Road Warriors fell out of critical favor. The very thing that made them revolutionary in 1983 came to be seen by some as a limitation. In an era where the highest praise goes to teams that can wrestle a technical masterpiece, a team famous for 90-second demolitions can get unfairly filed away as a novelty act rather than recognized as the innovators who made the whole genre of the monster tag team possible. So part of the answer is what happened to tag team wrestling itself. For a long stretch of modern wrestling, the tag division was treated as an afterthought, a place to park talent the company did not know what to do with, rather than the marquee attraction it had been in the Road Warriors' heyday. When an entire category of the business gets devalued, its history gets devalued along with it. The teams that ruled that world in the 1980s do not get celebrated the way the singles legends of the same era do, even when they drew just as much money and meant just as much to the fans. The Road Warriors were victims of that shift as much as anyone. They were the greatest at something the industry gradually decided mattered less. And part of the answer, the saddest part, is simply that they both died. There is no Road Warriors reunion tour. There's no pair of grinning legends showing up at conventions together, retelling the old stories, keeping the flame lit for new fans. So many acts stay famous partly because their members are still around to remind us. The Road Warriors have not had that voice since 2020. Both men are gone, and the dead do not get to fight for their own place in history. But here's what refuses to be forgotten, no matter how the record books are written. Look at almost any powerhouse tag team that has come since. Look at every duo that ever painted their faces, wore the leather and the spikes, marched out to heavy music, and dared the crowd to look away. Every one of them is walking a path the Road Warriors cut first. Demolition was built on their template before they ever arrived in the World Wrestling Federation. Countless teams across every promotion in the world for decades afterward borrowed the paint, the intimidation, the entrance, the whole idea of the tag team as an unstoppable monster act. They created the blueprint, and then the entire industry photocopied it for the next 40 years. They proved that a tag team did not have to be a stepping stone or an undercard afterthought. They proved a tag team could be the coolest, most over, most important act in an entire company. They proved that presence and aura and a genuine connection with the crowd could matter every bit as much as any hold or high spot. They were so influential that a whole category of imitators became known in the business itself as Road Warrior types. Think about that. When your name becomes the label for everyone who tries to follow you, you have won a kind of immortality that no single title reign could ever measure. The Road Warriors were not perfect wrestlers. They will tell you that themselves. They were something rarer than perfect. They were unforgettable. Two bouncers from a Minnesota nightclub who got thrown together by a last-second phone call and went on to conquer every major territory on the planet. Who invented a look so powerful it is still being copied 40 years later. Who gave crowds a feeling, that Road Warrior pop, that most performers chase their entire lives and never catch even once. They went from unstoppable to forgotten in the eyes of the mainstream. But among the people who truly know this business, among the wrestlers who studied them and the fans who saw them at their peak, they never faded at all. They remain exactly what they always were, the standard, the originals, the most dominant tag team that ever lived. And maybe the real tragedy is not that the world forgot them. Maybe the real tragedy is that we only ever fully appreciate legends like Hawk and Animal once they are no longer here to hear us say it. So if this video reminded you of just how special they were, do them one small favor. Say their names, tell someone about the paint and the spikes and the carnage. Keep the legend of the Road Warriors alive, because teams like this only come along once, and they deserve to be remembered as more than a sad final chapter. They deserve to be remembered as what they were, kings. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure you like and subscribe for more hard-hitting wrestling documentaries. And until next time, keep the memory of the greats alive.